Page 11. After Man, A Zoology of the Future, by Dougal Dixon, 1981. 1.2. Natural selection. Natural selection, resulting from the environmental conditions in which an organism lives, can have one of three different influences on a population. It can be stabilizing, directional or diversifying. The stabilizing influence can be seen where conditions have remained unchanged over a long period of time. The resultant environment consequently supports a well-balanced population of animals and plants in which evolutionary development is disadvantageous. Under such circumstances, any change occurring in a plant or animal will bring it out of the environment's neat, efficient, time-honored survival pattern and put the creature at a disadvantage, eventually resulting in its extinction. Its more conservative contemporaries, on the other hand, will survive. Animals that have been subjected to stabilizing selection for a long period of time may seem quite unspecialized and primitive compared with those of similar ancestry that have experienced a more eventful evolutionary history. Often they are characterized by passive survival mechanisms such as heavy armor, or high fecundity to offset losses through predation. The horse's earliest known ancestor, Hyracotherium, a small long-toed creature no bigger than a dog, inhabited the extensive forest areas found on the Earth between 50 and 60 million years before the age of man. As conditions became drier at the end of the Tertiary and the woodland receded, the creature became progressively better adapted to life on the plains. Its feet changed radically, the outer toes disappeared, leaving a single horny hoof. Its legs became longer as it evolved into a fully fledged running animal, and its dentition and digestive system changed from that of a browser to that of a grazer as its diet altered from leaves to grass. The most important structural changes occurred about the time of Merychippus, which appeared about 25 million years ago. The directional influence of natural selection is more evident when the environment itself changes. Under these circumstances, evolutionary changes occur such as to give the impression that the organism is evolving along a set path with a particular goal in view. This is quite erroneous and arises from the fact that in the context of its environment, the most recent member of an evolutionary series always appears much better adapted than the earlier intermediate stages which, where they are known, look half-formed and incomplete by comparison, even though they were equally well adapted to the environment's own earlier intermediate stages. An example of this is the evolution of the horse, which developed from a small forest-living browser into a large, long-legged running grazer as its environment altered from forest to open grassy plain. The small changes that enabled it to deal most effectively with its changing environment were continually selected for throughout its history, and in this way the horse evolved. The diversifying influence of natural selection takes effect when a new environment is established offering a fresh range of food resources and living spaces. An animal species entering this environment may well evolve different forms that are specifically adapted to each of these living spaces, or ecological niches. In the absence of competing animals, these different forms will eventually develop into completely new species. This is the kind of thing that happens when an island, or a group of islands, is thrown up by volcanic activity in the open ocean. From the original finch that arrived at the Galapagos Islands from South America, around 15 separate species evolved to fill the island's vacant ecological niches, each species with specialized characteristics suited to its own individual diet. The finches fall broadly into three distinct groups according to habitat: cactus, tree and ground dwellers, and differ mainly in the shape of the bill. It is thought that to begin with birds were scarce on the island, allowing the finches to evolve forms suitable for all the environmental slots available. A. Platypus Pisa crassirostris. B. Cactus Pisa heliobaites. C. Carmarinchus parvulus. D. Carmarinchus pauper. E. Pineraloxia zinamata. F. Certhidea olivacea. G. Geospisa fortis. H. Geospisa magniostris. I. Geospisa fulginesa. J. Geospisa conirostris. K. Geopisa scandens. The unpopulated island is slowly colonized by animals which gradually diversify into different species to exploit the whole area effectively. The classic example of evolutionary diversification is seen in the Galapagos Islands of the Pacific Ocean. Early in their history, a small finch arrived that subsequently evolved into tree-living, insect-eating forms, seed-eating forms with heavy bills, and a form that ate burrowing grubs winkled out with cactus spines. The large number of resulting species reflected the large number of ecological niches available on the islands. At the time of man, a chain of subspecies, or cline, existed around the North Pole, with the British lesser black-backed gull, Larus fuscus grellsii, and the British herring gull, Larus argentatus, as end members. All neighboring species of the cline could interbreed with one another excepting the end members, which, by the time the chain was complete, were too distantly related to mate with one another successfully. 1. British lesser black-backed gull, Larus fuscus grellsii. 2. Scandinavian lesser black-backed gull, Larus fuscus. 3. Siberian Vega gull, Larus argentatus vegi. 4. American herring gull, Larus argentatus smithsonianus. 5. British herring gull, Larus argentatus. Birds, with their power of flight, are usually the first vertebrates to reach a new island, and consequently far-flung islands can usually be counted upon to produce an interesting bird fauna. Typical are the heavy flightless birds, such as the moa, dinornis, of New Zealand, the dodo, rufus, of Mauritius, and the elephant bird, epimus, of Malagasy, all of which evolved in the absence of ground-living predators. The intervening sea was an effective barrier preventing interbreeding between the far-traveled individuals that reached the island and the original stock back home. Such barriers to interbreeding are necessary in the evolution of new species. Races or subspecies often coexist in the same area, exploiting slightly different environments or food resources but retaining the ability to interbreed. They may even exist as a chain of subspecies reaching from one region to another, each subspecies able to interbreed with the next one to it. When the species at the ends of the chain are quite different, the chain is called a cline. Occasionally a cline may form a ring, for example round a mountain range, where the two end members, although next to one another and related, are so different that no interbreeding is possible and are, technically speaking, different species. This poses problems in taxonomy sense, as interbreeding is possible elsewhere throughout the ring. The members must strictly be considered as subspecies of the same species. Once a group becomes isolated from its original population, it may develop on its own to such an extent that, if the isolating barrier later disappears and the two populations once more intermingle, interbreeding is no longer possible. They are now, by definition, two different species. The differences are accentuated if the new location the isolated group finds itself in is basically unsuitable. The group will very quickly disappear except for maybe a few individuals at the extremes of the species range that show some slight affinity for the environment. The species that then develops will be descended from those few individuals that were genetically different from the main population in the first place and contained by chance genetic traits which made them innately more likely to survive. Because organisms are capable of infinite variability and have an inherent tendency to change when set in an unstable environment, new species appear more rapidly when the environment is changing quickly. Evolution is so efficient that no ecological niche is left vacant for long. Something will always develop to fill it. Page 12.